Thank you, Nuri. Hi, everybody. Great to see you all. And I apologize in advance if we may have some vocal dog noises on this call. Although I think I just satiated him with a little treat. Um, but anyway, great to see you all, and good to have this chance to catch up on what's been going on in Washington, my work, and what I believe will be some very eventful weeks ahead for us. I'm back in New Jersey for a couple of weeks. My mind is still very much on the last few days we spent in Congress before this break, and in particular the vote that happened in both the House and the Senate on the January 6th commission, and what it says about the state of our politics and our ability to get things done in the right way in the US Congress, and how it applies to all the other things that we care about. And don't get me wrong, I'm very satisfied with a lot of what we've been able to accomplish already this year. And so this will be more of a glass half full presentation for me. But this is something that we just experienced that did disturb me quite a bit. And so I wanted to share some thoughts about it. The argument for this January 6th commission should have been pretty open and shut. And had you watched the debate in the Senate on the impeachment resolution back in January, I think you would have agreed with me that as controversial as that was, a commission would not be controversial, that Senator McConnell and many of the Republicans who felt that impeachment was a step too far at that point seemed to believe that, of course, what happened was a terrible, terrible crime, and that we needed to not just prosecute the individuals who trashed the United States Capitol, but to understand how it happened in the first place, how that terrible act happened in the first place, why it happened, what in our politics led to that event, and because we want to make sure it never happens again. The first attack on our capital, violent attack on our capital since, well, the War of 1812, when the British sacked Washington. And yet something over the succeeding months happened that made it increasingly harder for some of my Republican colleagues to support even the idea of a completely professional and nonpartisan investigation, even though, and this is the part that I think is the most important, even though Democrats and the bipartisan supporters of this proposal were willing to accept every single proposed compromise that the Republican leadership in the House and Senate asked for. Even then, they voted against it. And those of us like me who are committed to bipartisanship, who believe that it's better to do things in as unified a way as possible in Congress, whatever the issue we're working on, because the country needs to see that unity, even if members of the majority party, Democrats like me, have to compromise on some of the things that we want to achieve. It makes it harder for us to be able to make that case.
Well, this is even
here was a case where
Yeah.
we said yes to every proposed compromise, and in the end, they still said no. So that's something I'm still working through in my own mind, and I think a lot of us are working through as we decide how to approach the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge. The good news is that despite all of that drama, and there's still a lot of drama, there's still a lot of crazy in Washington, as you all know, the good news is we have been much more productive this year. The American Rescue Plan, which Congress adopted, the president signed, is now working. It's now helping people in our district, in our state, across the country. I've said a few times that if we had taken that massive bill and split it up into 12 individual pieces of legislation and passed all 12, people would already be saying that this has been one of the most productive sessions of Congress in modern American history. Not just the COVID relief, of course, as important as that was, but the attack on child poverty through the child tax credit, the lowering of healthcare costs, which I ran on in 2018 and 2020, the hundreds of dollars a month folks on the individual marketplace for healthcare are saving now because of that bill. The support that we were able to deliver to not just the state of New Jersey, but our county and municipal governments, no matter how small, which is enabling a lot of them to be able to balance their budgets this year without raising our property taxes. That's something I hope most people are aware of, that probably would have happened in a lot of our communities, either increased property taxes or significant cutbacks in services, if not for the state and local aid that we provided in the American Rescue Plan. So that's already done. On top of that, we're going to build the Gateway Tunnel. That's as close to signed, sealed, and delivered as you can imagine. You know, that's been a project of mine for the last 2 years. We can talk more about the details if you like. And we are now working on a major jobs and infrastructure bill that will do so much more for New Jersey and for the country. I don't know how that bill is going to pass, but I'm pretty confident that it will in some form. And yes, there will almost certainly have to be a few compromises from what Joe Biden proposed. You hear a little commotion there, sorry. But I think the core elements of that bill, which not only fixes things, not only puts people to work in New Jersey and across America, building the infrastructure of the future, but is also designed to be, and this is the part that I'm really focused on, designed to be a big down payment on making America the world leader in transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy, both for the sake of our kids, our climate, and for the sake of our economic competitiveness. So I'm really excited about what we can do. We're struggling through the ways and means and the partisanship and whether we can do things on a bipartisan basis or whether we have to just use our Democratic majority. I still prefer bipartisan, but my bottom line is we have to deliver for you. We have to deliver for the voters who sent us there. Otherwise, what's the point of having an election? So with that, tons of issues I didn't mention, of course, but I trust you to ask me about. So I will turn it back to Nari and to Kat to take your questions, and I look forward to answering as many as we can in the time that we have. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. All right, we are going to begin with a few frequently asked questions that were submitted beforehand, and after that, we will go into live questions. If your question that you pre-submitted was not asked during the FAQ portion, please ask again using the chat feature for it to be answered live today. A reminder, you do so by going to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please include your name and the town you are from along with your question. Now would be a great time to start submitting those as well. All right, Tom, for your first pre-submitted question, what is your position on the filibuster?
The filibuster, I'd like it to go away, please. That's my position on the filibuster. And I'll tell you why. It's not just because there's some bill I want to pass and the filibuster stands in the way. I honestly think that James Madison and Alexander Hamilton would be rolling over in their graves if they saw how the United States Senate, the Senate they designed in the Constitution of the United States, is functioning right now. The Constitution spells out that certain things require a supermajority, right? Constitutional amendments, ratifying treaties. There are certain things that are particularly important, where impeachment is another one, where the framers of the Constitution said it's not enough for one party that happens to have a majority to be able to pass something. You need greater unity in the country. But the idea that every single routine bill now effectively requires 60% of the United States Senate to vote for it is completely contrary to the constitutional design of our country. No other democracy functions this way around the world. And the United States Congress, the US Senate didn't function this way until relatively recently in American history. The filibuster was used a few times in the 19th century. Of course, it was famously used to block civil rights legislation in the 1960s, and that was controversial. But it was not used routinely to block everything unless you had 60 votes. And it's gotten so bad where to filibuster a bill, you don't have to lift a finger. As we saw on the vote on the January 6th Commission in the Senate, you don't even have to show up. There are only 35 members of the Senate who voted against the January 6th Commission. But the burden is on the majority party at all times to produce 60 people to be able to get legislation through the process. I think that needs to be reversed. I'd be fine with the filibuster going away altogether. I think that's probably not likely to happen. But I think what's more likely, and I would be very happy with this as well, would be reform of the filibuster that actually takes us more backwards than forwards. Reform that requires senators who are filibustering to actually hold the Senate floor, to be there, to be present, to be talking into the wee hours of the night, even if they have to read the phone book or the Bible to keep things going. Have a system that, yes, allows the minority some power to prevent the majority from trampling them on things that matter, but make them show that it really, really matters, that it's really important. Bring the American people into that conversation by having an old-fashioned talking filibuster on the floor of the Senate. That would be much better than the system we have now and would allow most legislation, not all, but most legislation to pass with the simple majority that the framers intended. So that's my opinion. What's going to happen? I don't know. You guys know that you can change the rules of the Senate with a simple majority. So that would require all the Democrats to be on board with the change. And I'm sure you all know there are one or two Democrats, particularly Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who feel strongly as a matter of principle that the filibuster should remain in place. They think it incentivizes bipartisan cooperation. I disagree with Joe, but I think that he's sincere in his belief. And what you're seeing play out right now in the Senate is really an argument for Joe Manchin's vote. And I would hope that he, especially after the January 6th Commission debacle, that he would see that, well, even when Democrats bend over backwards now to try to bring Republican voices into the conversation and to take on board their proposed changes to bills that we want to pass, even then, we're not getting those 10 Republican senators necessary to get to 60. And particularly on voting rights, civil rights legislation, questions of fundamental justice and protection of democracy in our country, it just seems to me that, well, we ought to be able to persuade him in the coming weeks and months that this system should be reformed. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Great for your next pre-submitted question. And after this, we are going to go into live questioning. So again, now is a great time to start submitting those questions, and I will let you know when you are next up. But before we get to that, Tom, what do you think is the likelihood that the SALT deduction will be fully reestablished this year?
I try to not predict likelihood. What I will tell you is what I always say, which is my job is to promote things, not to predict things. And so I've been fighting for this. I got the House to pass legislation fully restoring the SALT deduction in 2019, had no chance with McConnell running the Senate. And I've been insisting in the context of our current debate about massive new spending, potentially paid for with new taxes, that if we are going to have new taxes that fall in any way on individual taxpayers in New Jersey, that we have to deal with SALT in some way as part of that deal. So as you know, President Biden's proposed this jobs and infrastructure bill, which I mentioned. He's proposed something he calls the American Families Plan, which gets into healthcare, education, childcare, all kinds of things that are important to us. And he has proposed a number of ways of raising revenue to pay for these proposals. Congress now has to debate all of that. Some of those proposals are like, well, let's give the IRS a lot more money so they can go after wealthy and corporate tax cheats. There are proposals to raise the corporate tax from 21 to 25, maybe 28. There are proposals to, very, very important in my view, to try to ensure that corporations cannot hide their profits by booking them to their overseas affiliates, thus avoiding US corporate taxes. There are proposals, mostly from the Republican side, to pay for some of the infrastructure by raising quote unquote user fees, i.e. gas taxes and tolls, what we actually spend directly to support the infrastructure that we use. And there are proposals to raise the top income tax rate back up to 39.6%. For income over $400,000, back to where it was in 2017. Some things on the estate tax as well. So as you see, some of those proposals don't directly hit individual taxpayers in New Jersey. Recouping corporate profits stashed overseas, that, I don't see that as a direct impact on us as individuals. But once you start talking about raising like individual tax rates, that's when I put my foot down and say, I'm not gonna vote for that unless we address SALT as part of it. So the answer to your actual question, can I predict, is it depends a little bit on what is ultimately moving through the House and Senate this year to pay for the spending that President Biden and many of us have proposed. I have the most leverage. We in the New Jersey delegation have the most leverage if on SALT, if we are realistically moving other tax provisions that are going to affect our constituents. And I think that's where we can say to our leadership, we cannot vote for that. And they do need our votes, right? So we would have the leverage under those circumstances. So that's my question. That's my answer. I'm fighting hard for it. We have some leverage, but how much depends on the nature of these big spending and revenue raising packages that I hope will be moving through the Congress this year. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. All right, now's the time we are going to start beginning live questioning. Again, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to ask your question live today, and I will let you know when you are up next. To start, we have Joanne from Clark. Joanne, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Hi, Congressman. I want to say that I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this Zoom. I've been waiting to actually speak to you for quite some time now. I was told I have one question, but actually I have a part A and part B to my question.
Joan, could I stop you for just 1 second? This is silly. I have to save something for my dog. 1 sec.
I have a dog. I know what it's like.
He's a little upset with me right now, so he's chewing something he shouldn't chew. Okay, go. I'm all yours.
Okay, so I've in New Jersey my whole entire life. I have 3 wonderful children that my husband and I literally worked 4 jobs between the both of us to put our children through proper education in school.
Right.
So now have grandchildren. Congressman, I really do want to stay in New Jersey. I want to be with my children. I want to be with my grandchildren. But to be quite honest with you, we can't afford it. So 2 years I'm looking to retire and I'm probably going to have to move out. I don't want that to happen. Now, here's part B of my question. That is what it is. It's New Jersey. I be honest with you, I don't know how you're going to fix New Jersey. But when I see the border crisis and I see these immigrants coming over and these open borders, listen, like I said to you, I put 3 kids through college. I cannot afford putting immigrant children through college. I cannot afford to pay for them. I'm telling you, I don't. And I know it's not a direct payment. Don't get me wrong. I know it reeks its ugly head in taxes and so on and so forth. It's never a direct payment to the immigrants, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm a smart person. I've been around for a while. This is what angers me the most, is that I have to pay for these services. Why?
So let me take both parts of your question. And first of all, um, what I'm hearing from you, I hear from a lot of folks who have worked hard, as you and your family have, to give your kids the best possible opportunities. And we don't make it easy in so many different ways, with the cost of higher education, with the student loan burden, and of course with the high cost of living in the state of New Jersey, and our high state and local taxes, including the property taxes. There is there's some people who think everyone is escaping New Jersey, and that's not true. Actually, more people are moving into New Jersey than moving out. That's good, but there is a generational issue, which is that people move into New Jersey for the really great schools that we have for our kids. That's what we get for our high property taxes. But then when they get to the point where you're at, and the kids are out of the house and through college, those property taxes and all the other things do make it very difficult for people to stay. And they're forced to make the choice: do I stay where I've lived my whole life, where my grandkids may still live, um, or does that become prohibitively expensive? So even if we're getting more migration into than out of New Jersey, that's still a very big problem. So how do we address it? You're right. I'm not running for governor. So there's a lot about how we tax and spend in New Jersey that I can't directly affect. The thing that I can directly affect the most is what we were just talking about, and that's the SALT deduction and other federal programs that come back to either help or bite taxpayers in New Jersey. One reason I'm fighting really, really hard on SALT is because any homeowner in New Jersey, like yourself, lost at least $2,000 or $3,000 when the Congress in 2017 capped the SALT deduction to $10,000. And that was a direct and deliberate hit on states like ours with the needs that we have. For folks who still have kids in the house, we just delivered something really, really big to make life more affordable. And I know this doesn't affect you directly anymore, but younger families are going to benefit tremendously from this refundable child tax credit that we just passed: $3,000 per child, $3,600 for kids under 6. That helps with the cost of childcare, school expenses, all of the different things that parents need to pay for to be able to work and at the same time take good, proper care of their kids. So that's part one. Part two, you asked about the border and about immigration. I'm not for open borders. I can't say that any more clearly than I just did. I am very strongly in favor of legal immigration to America. I believe that we have to do everything in our power to limit illegal immigration to our country. And part of that means having strong controls, effective controls at the border. And I support that. I think it's even more important that if we want to think about the border crisis, the bigger solution to the border crisis is actually not at the border, but far away from it. It's in the Central American countries where people are pushed to flee because of violence, and right here in our own backyard, in our own hometowns, where people are pulled to come because we don't enforce immigration laws with regard to employers. And so what I support is something that's been on the table for years, that's been supported by moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, and that's comprehensive immigration reform, which says realistically that the folks who are already here are going to stay here if they pay a fine, if they haven't committed crimes. We want to give them a chance to work legally, but at the same time, we actually start enforcing the law with regard to employers by making them go through something called the E-Verify system, where they actually have to verify whether the person presenting a Social Security number is in fact legally allowed to work in the United States. That's always been the compromise. And as for paying for services for immigrants, I mean, you alluded to this in your question. We do not directly pay for anything. Federal programs don't go to undocumented immigrants. But here's what I would like to do, and you may agree or disagree with this, but I think it speaks to the spirit of your question. The immigrants who are here, I want to turn them into taxpayers. And that's one of the things that immigration reform is designed to do. Many of them already pay taxes. They pay Social Security taxes. They'll never get Social Security. So the dirty secret of Social Security and Medicare is that it is supported to some extent by the undocumented population. But many of them do not pay taxes. They're living in the shadows. And precisely for some of the reasons that you mentioned, I think it is in our interest as a country that we allow these people to come out from the shadows, pay a fine, become full-fledged taxpayers, supporting all of the programs that are entirely on our shoulders right now to pay for, and that we cut off the flow of future illegal migration, again, by enforcing E-Verify and making sure that employers are held accountable. So it's a complicated question, controversial, people are passionate about it, but that's where I come down. Thank you so much for raising it.
Thank you both. We are going to go to Nancy in Berkeley Heights. Nancy, can you hear us? Nancy, do we have you?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you.
Hey, Nancy.
Hi, I think I saw you in Summit Memorial Day Parade yesterday.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. Yes, I was very happy to see you. You're doing a great job, and you helped me get unemployment. Thank you very much last year.
Thank you.
This year, if you could help my husband and I have one son home that's in college. We qualified for the third stimulus package, but we never got it. That's one. And the second one, I'm sorry, is that will Medicare at 60 be included in the new bill?
So when you mean you didn't get it, was that the stimulus check you didn't get?
Yes, we didn't get the third one.
So that's make sure you share your info with my team. I think you can, Nari, you can update us, but just if you're willing to give us contact info in the chat, or
Yes.
just do a casework request through my website.
Yeah, I just did.
You did good. So we will look into that for you.
Thank you.
Look, the IRS, we're learning some things about our creaky government agencies, right? The unemployment office. Nobody cared about the unemployment office until millions of us were unemployed. And now, like, we realized they were using computer systems from the 16th century. The IRS has been underfunded for many, many years, because guess what? It's not that popular for politicians to go around saying, give more money to the IRS. And now suddenly, like, we all are waiting for our checks, and there's no customer service and nobody to talk to you to help you. So that's another reason why I'm one politician who, yes, is actually saying, let's give some more money to the IRS. We'll also raise a lot more money that way, so that honest, law-abiding taxpayers don't have the full burden here. So that's on that, and we'll do our best to help you.
Thank you.
On lowering the Medicare age, look, I support it. I support a full public option. Like, I think everybody in America should be able to buy into a public system like Medicare if they choose. They should have the freedom to do that. That would, I think, create some constructive competition for the private health insurance industry and get costs down for everybody. President Biden has proposed going down to age 60. I have a whole separate bill that would go down to 50 for first responders, retired firefighters, police officers, EMS. So there's a lot being considered, and some of this will be considered as part of this American Families Plan that Biden has proposed after we do the jobs and infrastructure bill. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but that's That's where we are, bottom line. As I mentioned, that's where I am. As I mentioned, in the American Rescue Plan, for folks who are not yet of Medicare age, and you do not have good health insurance from your employer, what we did there was significantly reduce the premiums that you pay for health insurance on the open marketplace through the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare marketplace. So if you are in that situation, please check that out on Get Covered New Jersey, on the Get Covered New Jersey website. And you may see that you'll save a significant amount in monthly health insurance costs. So take a look.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have John from Westfield. John, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead with your question.
Hey.
Hi. So Tom, over a year ago, back in the beginning of March 2020, right before the pandemic, members of Sunrise Hunterdon County met with you to discuss climate action. During the meeting, we presented you with a pledge, the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. The pledge states that you will not take contributions of over $200 from oil, gas, and coal industry lobbyists or PACs. You would prioritize the health of your constituents, the health of families, and the well-being of the planet over the corporate fossil fuel industry profits. At the meeting, you said that you'd consider the pledge, and you gave us the emails of 2 staffers to follow up with. After sending multiple emails over the course of a few weeks and months, we still received no response. You had seen you were open to this, and yet you didn't, and that you didn't even take large contributions from fossil fuel executives. Yet we recently found out that in 2020, you took $13,933 from ExxonMobil alone. So now we are forced to ask you again, will you continue to ignore the well-being of your community and take money from the very people who are putting us in danger? Or will you keep your promises and sign on to the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge?
Thanks, John. So as I think you know, I don't.
My name isn't John. That's just a fake name, by the way. I'm Miles. I'm a part of Sunrise Morris County.
Okay. Well, okay, whatever your name is. It's so as I think you know, I don't take contributions from any corporate PAC, any corporation. I do take contributions from people who work for all kinds of companies and institutions, and I don't. You may disagree with this, but I don't have a rule that where we look at the companies that individuals who make contributions for my reelection campaign and then return checks if we don't like the company that they work for.
Well, then why aren't you
or
signing on to the pledge? If you don't do it already, then it shouldn't be a problem.
Again, I think the pledge goes a little bit beyond that. I think the most important thing here is that, as I think you know, I'm fighting very, very hard for strong climate policies, whether it's through the jobs and infrastructure bill that we are hopefully about to pass. I'm one of the people insisting that bill include huge new investments in research into technologies that are going to help us defeat climate change, a huge expansion in the electrical motor vehicle fleet and charging stations, a huge upgrade in the national electrical grid so that we can actually deliver power to those cars and to our homes, a binding target in terms of reduction in the use of fossil fuels in generating power in this country down to 0 by 2050. I'm one of the few members of Congress right now that's co-sponsored just about every single piece of legislation to impose a market price or tax on carbon because I feel so strongly about climate change. So I don't know, there may be a couple of people who donated to me who work for Exxon, but even Exxon just had a shareholder revolt by its own shareholders, basically saying we've got to become a clean energy company. Like, we're not going to make money in 2030, 2040, 2050 if we're a natural gas and oil company. So, you know, I'm guessing it was probably that side of Exxon that whose employees thought that helping a guy like me was a good idea. So anyway, that's where I am.
But
That's
your own campaign finance summary says you took it from ExxonMobil, the company.
well, then that's probably somebody who is looking at the employer of the person who has donated to me. And some people do it that way. Some people make that kind of assessment based on employers. And because when you donate to a political campaign, you basically have to give your name and your employer so that people can make precisely that kind of analysis. But I would not take money from ExxonMobil, the corporation, or their PAC, or any PAC, from any corporation. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tom. We are going to head to Nick in Berkeley Heights. Nick, can you hear us?
You say no PAC.
Nick, do we have you on the line? Nick in Berkeley Heights.
Hello? Hello?
No.
Nick.
Do we have you, Nick?
Yes, I'm here. I just seem to have lost the video, but as long as you could hear me.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, I had sent in a question previously. I am a small business owner. We actually survived and actually grew through COVID. Increased our labor. Revenue has gone up. Profits have gone down because of the cost, although I think it's temporary, all the additional costs.
Yeah.
A big problem with small business right now is labor force.
Right.
We cannot survive like this. I'm about to embark on a project. I'm building a much larger facility. This is a success story of every small business, and I've lost. I'm losing hope. And I'm second generation. I'm in this business 50 years, and I've never experienced this phenomenon where we cannot find employees. So we're allowed to open up fully. We're allowed to function. Our costs have gone through the roof, and we keep cutting checks. So what incentivizes me from building my business and growing, which for me, a success story in a business is growing it to the point that you're employing more people. When does this end? And quite frankly, I appreciate the stimulus packages. It's meant to be stimulating the economy, but I'm competing with government for $20, $25 an hour. They're paying more than me.
Yeah. What kind of business do you have, just out of curiosity, Nick?
I'm in the food business.
Food business, okay. So look, I'm hearing this from small business owners a lot right now. I know it's real. And like everything in America, there's a partisan debate about what's responsible. And back in Washington, Republicans tend to emphasize the extra unemployment benefits that we've been paying, and Democrats tend to say it's more troubles with childcare and kids out of school, and just workers reeling from the last year, and in some cases rethinking what they want to do with their lives. My view is that it's all of those things. And so there isn't one solution to the problem, but we probably have to attack all of them. On the unemployment benefits, I don't think they should be extended further. I very, very much doubt they would be extended further. They expire in September right now. As you know, that may be too late for you. I think you probably, from the sound of your question, you'd probably like to cut it off now, but Congress did when we, in the last bill, we did extend it to September. So my guess is that's probably when that's going to come to an end. And I would support it ending at that point, to be clear. And in the meantime, I do think we do have to look at some of these other explanations as well, particularly folks who have kids. Like, it has been such a struggle, as you well know, in the last year, and it remains a struggle for anybody who needs childcare for their young kids. And so I do think we should also be, not just for the next couple of months, but for the long term, investing more in ensuring that every parent of a young kid has access to affordable childcare, in part for the, sake of the kids, but also so that the parents have more freedom to be full and active participants in the workforce. So that's my reaction. But again, I hear you. I know this is real. I've heard it from enough people to understand that this is part of the crisis right now. I'm also glad that for all of the chaos and trauma and loss of the last year, that we were able to come through for you guys with the PPP and with other programs. And again, I know you're facing what you just described to me, but I'm glad that we were able to get so many of our small businesses working with their owners through the worst part of the crisis, so that now we have this problem. It's, could have been much worse. Thank you, Nick.
It's a tough issue, and we all appreciate the PPP. Without it, many small businesses would have died. And I guess what I'm asking is, with every major decision, just keep the small guys employ a lot of people, and it's usually local moms, local people that, the $15, $20, $25 an hour. They're not the career where you're making 150 grand. And it affects communities in a large way. So your decisions in Congress, just keep that in mind with us and our pains. Even though some moves might sound like they're actually helping us, in fact, they might be hurting us.
Thank you, Nick. I know. And look, you don't just employ a lot of the people, you employ most of the people in the communities that I represent. And one reason I do these little town halls as often as I can is I can't make the decisions without hearing exactly this kind of thing from you. And I know we mess up some of the time because this is really complicated stuff, and everything that has a benefit has a cost. I'm sure you would, I hear you on the payments, but 6 months ago, I think the payments were also helping small business owners because people had more money to spend, right, on Main Street. And so it was cost benefit. And I think at that point, the benefit outweighed the cost. I think we're at a point right now where you can argue that the cost is outweighing the benefit, and we have to make that adjustment.
Thank you for listening.
Of course, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Tom. We are going to head to Winifred in Summit. Winifred, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for doing this. And I think Nick set up the conversation for me perfectly. So all roads to economic recovery for families of young children depend on a robust early care and education system. The child care industry pre-pandemic was on the verge of collapse due to an over-reliance on enrollment and an inability to offer staff wages and benefits seen in more socially valued industries. Now our industry has been completely devastated by the pandemic, and more daunting, we're now faced with an even more challenging problem: finding, hiring, and retaining, qualified employees. How do you propose to help stabilize the childcare industry and address the workforce shortage if we're to move the economy forward?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, this is basically what we were just talking about from a slightly different but reinforcing point of view. And look, we are a special country. We don't do things exactly the way most other countries do, and I don't want to turn America into some carbon copy of France or England or Canada, but it is a fact that we do tend to invest less in families than almost any other wealthy country in the world. We just did one big thing on the road to fixing that through this refundable child tax credit that I just mentioned. And that's relevant to the childcare industry because, of course, one of the first things that families are going to do with that extra money is to be able to afford better childcare options for their kids. So indirectly, right, it helps. I do think, and you alluded to this, right, the childcare industry employs people who are undervalued and who should be valued more. We learned a lot in the COVID pandemic about what kind of work should be valued in our country, right? And most of us who get to zoom in our work, right, including me, frankly, the last year for the most part, maybe our work is not, maybe our work shouldn't be valued quite as much as somebody who had to continue to work every single day of the pandemic. Those folks doing nursing jobs and supporting the nursing jobs and taking care of our elderly and taking care of our kids and things that you just can't stop doing, but are making, compared to white collar workers, unbelievably low salaries. And so I think, when President Biden and many of us talk about greater federal support for childcare in this country, that's one of the things we have in mind. The pandemic will be behind us very, very soon. And so some of the special burdens that the pandemic imposed will be behind us very, very soon in terms of the, class size and employee to child ratio and that sort of thing. But I do think it's got to be an industry that can afford to pay a little bit more, given the incredible importance of what the folks working in it do for all of us. We entrust them with our children for much of the day. That's important and it should be valued. So I hope we can get it done. And it's, like everything, it's controversial. We were talking about it at one point as part of the infrastructure bill, and then we have this stupid debate about that's not real infrastructure. And okay, it's not, but it's important, and we should do what's helpful and important. And I hope at some point this year we will have a House and a Senate that is wise enough to be able to make some of these additional investments. Thank you.
Thanks, Winifred. Thanks, Tom. We are going to head to Westfield again with Walter. Walter, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of quick comments and then a question. I just want to thank you, Representative Malinowski, for having these town hall, so-called sort of town hall meetings. They're very useful. Thank you for doing it. And I wanted to say that I appreciate all the statements you made on immigration a few minutes ago. In the answer to the question, your positions, I think, are ones that I totally agree with. So thank you for your efforts in that area. I think it's a very important issue also. My simple question for you is on backing to your salt limit. People on the other side, the one side, Bernie Sanders specifically say the salt limit's a good thing because it keeps rich people from benefiting. If we removed it, it would just help rich people. And being in New Jersey, that $10,000 is a very low limit because people pay more than that in property taxes. So, it affects middle class people, not just rich people. So I was thinking one way to deal with that objection would be a compromise and to raise it. So a number of 25,000 is one that occurred to me as something that would capture a lot of people that are middle class, but still you could say, well, maybe the people that are very rich would still have to pay it.
Yep.
So it's a thought, and the question is it something you would consider as a way to moving, at least making it better for a lot of people?
Sure. I think you're hitting on a very important point. First of all, we all know living in New Jersey, this affects everyone who owns a home. Whether you've got a 20-room mansion, yes, sure, but any middle-class person who owns a modest house in New Jersey was hurt by the loss of the SALT deduction. And so I don't have a lot of patience with the argument that this is only for rich folks. I've chosen my public statements, my words in my public statements very carefully on this. I've basically said that, if there are tax provisions in any of these bills that affect individual taxpayers in my district, then I can only support that if the bill also addresses or restores the SALT deduction for my hardworking middle-class constituents. And I chose every one of those words carefully. I'm not getting into specific potential compromises just because I don't want to negotiate with myself in a public forum, right? I want to get the best possible deal for New Jersey. But I think you can interpret my words, which were chosen carefully, in a way that would answer the question that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. Next up, we have Andrea from Union. Andrea, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much. Walter K., I couldn't agree with you more. Tom, thank you very much for doing this, and I thank your team. I wanted to touch on your comments regarding the fees on immigration. Where would those fees go?
You mean a fine?
Yes.
Yeah. So most of the immigration reform proposals have said that, let's say you're an undocumented person living in America. You don't have a criminal record, you pass a background check, you get through all of those hurdles, then you can begin to apply for legal status, eventually a green card, eventually citizenship. But we don't want it to be as easy for you as somebody who comes in legally, right? Because that would be unfair to the people who come in illegally. So it would take longer. And you would pay a fine, basically, as a penalty for having come into the country illegally, of some amount, right? There are different proposals, different bills, it would all have to be negotiated. And I guess that fine would just go into the US Treasury, just like any fine that you pay to the US government for, paying your taxes late or something like that.
Okay, thank you. And I do have a second question. I wanted to know if the government is putting any policies in place or have anything, should there ever be another pandemic, the way this hit us so quickly, such as we had, do we have anything in place to help those people and they don't have to wait for unemployment, for
Yep.
stimulus checks, for any government help? Because
Yes.
this is scaring people.
Yes. So yes. Big capital letters. Yes. As I said before, like we learned through this crisis just how inadequate some of these agencies are that are supposed to help us in times of crisis. So on the IRS and the stimulus checks,
Yes.
we are, and there's bipartisan consensus on this. I'm happy to say we're definitely going to increase the budget of the IRS, in part to improve customer service and also, to make it harder for certain types of taxpayers who've been able to get away not paying what they owe. On the unemployment system, I've actually been very much involved in this and asking the members of Congress who write our budget, the appropriators as we call them, to include a new investment in modernizing our state unemployment systems so that they have proper computers and they can actually handle a huge surge in applicants like what we saw this last year. And then even more important than those things, we got to make sure we're not hit by another mass pandemic again, right? I mean, there will be global infectious disease outbreaks. We know that, right? And we took our eye off the ball. We were not monitoring this internationally as well as we should have. We need the World Health Organization to do a better job. Many of us are talking about this now, Democrats and Republicans. We need to have supply chains in the United States for all of the medical equipment and chemicals and related stuff that we need to take care of ourselves when something like this happens. We don't want to be over-reliant on PPE and medical equipment and other things manufactured, say, in China. So a lot is being done right now to try to make sure that we have domestic capacity to produce and supply these essential things, so that we are much better prepared if something like this threatens us again.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you,
I
Andrea.
appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. We still have time for some more questions. So again, if you do have a question you would like to ask Tom live today, please do so by using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to everyone's question today. Next up, we have Mary Ellen from Berkeley Heights. Mary Ellen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead with your question.
Yes. Congressman, I am interested in your position on guardianships in the courts that allow the United States to make a disabled person or an elderly person pay for all costs of those proceedings when no other minority has to do that for an alleged incapacity. Many times, most times, 98% of the time, the guardianships are put down on these people and they do not even fit incapacity. There are several problems with this because it causes Medicaid and Medicare fraud. It causes that a prisoner cannot be used as a medical experiment, but a ward of the state legally in the United States can be experimented on without their permission.
So, Mary Ellen, most of the time when I get questions in a forum like this, I have a good answer. At least I try to have a good answer because it's an issue that I've worked on and thought about. But just about every one of these, somebody brings up an issue like this that I actually don't know enough about. But I'm grateful to you for bringing it up, and I'm wondering, would you be willing to follow up with a member of my staff, and we can dig into this a little bit deeper? I don't want to give you an ill-informed answer. So I think
I did request a meeting with you, but just last week in California, Linda Kincaid, a disability advocate, got ABC News to do a series. There is a 5-part series in California outlining this. And unfortunately, when people go to the Congress and the Senate, nothing happens. I have been to Washington, D.C. My husband was put under an illegal guardianship because of Sloan Kettering in 2007. And it was in Union County. And my husband passed away in 2019.
I'm sorry.
From the year 2008 to 2019, the court never asked where my husband was. This is an egregious misuse of funds. The government is paying for these citizens, and I would be more than willing to sit down with you to educate you further, because it really does cause extraordinary Medicare and Medicaid fraud. And a prisoner in the United States cannot be experimented on, but the medical community knows who they can experiment on are the elderly and disabled, because on the books in the United States, it is legal to do that to the disabled and elderly.
Okay. So could you, you mentioned there was an ABC report on this, or series of reports?
Yes, there was, and I sent it to Leah.
Okay, good.
And I've asked for status because my husband's last wish was that I tried to speak to you before about this to see if we could push this forward. Sloan Kettering in 2008 wanted to use my husband as a medical experiment. We said no. So they drug us into the courts, and their neurologist put that I was murdering my husband. They said he would be dead in 4 years. That was in 2007. He didn't die until 2019. It's an egregious misuse of power. We went to the prosecutors. We went to Washington, D.C. And for some reason, we're sidestepping an issue that is so paramount to the elderly and disabled. All lives matter, and all minorities should be treated with dignity and respect. And it is not happening. But the biggest factor of this, if the government wants to save on Medicaid and Medicare, they need to get this under control. Because when my husband was dying, they would not even give him painkillers because all they wanted to do was get a piece of his brain. It is egregious what they're doing to the elderly and the disabled. And I asked for, and many people across the United States have asked for this to be overturned. I would appreciate it if President Joe Biden could look into this as well. My husband was a brain tumor patient.
Yeah.
He lived for 25 years, but we didn't get to live because the Berkeley Heights police were stalking us because our home was worth money. And if they got us kicked out of our home, the people that are developers could get the house for a sheriff's sale, and then they can profit substantially. And that is what guardianship is all about. It is about profit making from the courts to the attorneys, to the guardianship companies, to the people in the towns that are connected to saying, if we take this person and liquidate them, we get everything for free and they live in the street. And then who has to pick that up? But it's the United States government, because all of this sudden, all assets have been liquidated. And this is for all elderly and disabled people across the United States. And I would appreciate, but I will send the rest of the series to Leah. I sent some of it last week.
Okay, that will be good. So I think send us the series and that'll be good background for my team.
Yes.
And then when they talk to you, they'll have a, they'll know more. They'll have a good foundation for that conversation.
And, it was very unique that 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by somebody in Florida.
Yeah.
Last week, I was contacted by people in California asking me if I would step forward again.
Yeah.
So I'm doing my part.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. I know this is not an easy thing to talk about.
And
It's
Mary,
not, but it's needed.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Thank
Mary
you.
Ellen, I reached out to you in the private chat just to grab your email address as well. I know you've been in contact with some members of our team, but if you wouldn't mind just sharing your email address with me as well, we will have more of our staff look into this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you so much. Next up, we are going to Carol from Short Hills. Carol, can you hear us?
I can. The question that I have for you is, there's a lot of concern, particularly with the big lie and watching what's going on in states across the country.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if, unfortunately, in 2024, if in 2022, the Democrats lose the House and the Senate, and then we come to the 2024 presidential election and the Democrats win, but the Republicans fail in Congress, fail to certify the election? Is there anything being done to prevent that from happening?
As you guys know, I try in these town hall format meetings, I try to avoid kind of the Democrat versus Republican thing as much as I can. I mean, I'll tell you factually, if Democrats are proposing something or Republicans vote against it, I'll just say it factually, but I try to keep this as nonpartisan as possible. That said, I think there's no question that in many states around the country, some Republican legislators, probably the dominant force right now in that party, are proposing bill after bill after bill, and where they can, passing bill after bill after bill to make it harder for their citizens to vote. And they're doing this because they say they need to restore the confidence of the American people in the integrity of the election. And of course, the only reason why many Americans do not have confidence in the integrity of the election is because those same politicians have been incessantly telling them falsely that there was fraud in the 2020 election. So they go out and say there was fraud, there was a steal, and then they propose these bills and say, well, we're only doing it because people out there think there was fraud and a steal. And it does seem like the actual problem they're trying to solve is not the fraud that didn't happen, but they just were upset that the wrong people from their point of view turned out in very large numbers in 2020. And I think that's quite disturbing. It's one reason I strongly support HR 1, a bill that would require some of these provisions that make it easier for folks to vote, drop boxes and early voting. I mean, why would anyone want to take away drop boxes, which we all used in New Jersey and were such a success? But then you raise an even more disturbing question, right? Which is about more than just, is it easier or harder to vote? You know, I want it to be easier. If it becomes harder, I still think that Americans are so dedicated to voting right now that they will line up for 10 hours if they have to. I hate that they have to, but they will do it if they have to. You're asking a darker and scarier question, which is, are we getting to a point where public authorities in this country that are supposed to maintain the nonpartisan nature of our elections become so partisan that they actually just vote in a state or in the Congress to award victory to the loser? And it didn't happen in 2020, right? In 2020, in state after state after state, whether controlled by Democrats or Republicans, people acted with integrity. In Georgia,
It didn't happen, but it came down to a handful of people.
But it came down to a handful. I get it, right? So it didn't happen. The system worked, but there were people in Congress who were willing, as we saw, even after that riot, even after that violent attack on us, on our institution, on our Capitol, there were people who were willing to not certify the election. And what if they have a majority to do that? And again, I don't mean a party, but people who feel that way. What if they have a majority? What is the safeguard?
And it's a particular concern when we see we can't even get a bipartisan commission to study what the heck happened on January 6th.
I understand. And look, I am concerned about this. I don't want to be alarmist because many people were alarmist in 2020. And in the end, the system worked. People, Republicans as well as Democrats, pro-Trump Republican officials across America acted with integrity and enforced the law. But they've taken huge hits as a result, right? They're all like being challenged in primaries because they did the right thing. So I'm concerned about this. And I think, ultimately the safeguard is the ultimate safeguard we have for defending our freedoms in America. And that is our voice and our vote. And that's why it's so important for all of us to be involved, whether you're, whatever your views about policy, whether you're politically conservative or liberal. And we have many voices in this call from both sides on issues like immigration and small businesses and taxes. There are Republicans on this call, there are Democrats, there are conservatives, there are liberals. And those are all legitimate arguments that we should be fighting about. That's fine. But when it comes to protecting the integrity of our democracy, the results of our elections, the enforcement of our laws, that's where we have to come together and just be Americans. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Thanks, Tom. Next up, we have Karen. Karen.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, I don't remember what time.
I'm here. Thank you so much. My question is tag along to what we were just talking about, because I am concerned. I see what's going on in Texas. I think the Democrats are doing a great job trying to hold the line, but why can't we get the voter rights, those bills that are out there moved up? I mean,
Yep.
infrastructure is important, and we're going to be doing it, and I think we're going to end up having to do it ourselves, and the Democrats are going to have to vote for it, based on what I've seen. But why can't, I think Texas is hurrying up to get their thing passed so that they can get it in there before the Voters' Rights Act goes into effect. And there's 2 of them there. So why are we waiting till maybe the end of July, which is what I heard, to move forward on that when it's happening now? And I think Republicans are not trying to, well, I am trying to be political, but why are we not thinking it's more of a priority to get it done?
Yeah, I'll tell you why. And first of all, look, I want to move the jobs bill fast. Part of the argument that I want to make when I'm speaking to my constituents is that I'm focused on creating jobs when other people are focused on creating drama and chaos, right? That's important, that we are responsible, focus on meeting people's needs. On voting rights, there are 2 bills. There's HR 1, which is the more ambitious one that we already passed in the House. It's also more controversial because it's got so many different provisions. There's also HR 4, which is the extension of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's the one I think you're referring to.
Right.
We've not passed that in the House yet, and I'll tell you why. Because the reason for that bill is that a few years ago, the Supreme Court struck down the most effective provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the provision that allows the federal government to supervise these changes in states that have a pattern of voter suppression. And so we're trying to restore those provisions. But having read that Supreme Court decision and talked to a lot of the legal experts, we believe that to survive the next Supreme Court case, right, because it'll be challenged again in front of the Supreme Court case, in front of the Supreme Court, we have to hold a lot of hearings to establish evidence that there is voter suppression today in those states. Again, just reading that Supreme Court decision, that was the message the court was sending back to us as legislators. Like, if you want something like this, you can't just base it on what was going on in the 1960s. You have to show there's a pattern and practice today of voter suppression in some of these states, voter restrictions that are unconstitutional. And so we feel like we have to do that. So when we pass it, it can make it through the Supreme Court. Now, this also takes us back to the first question today about the filibuster, right? To pass any of this, we need either to have 10 Republican votes in the Senate or an agreement from Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Sinema, that we are going to change the filibuster rules in some ways to allow us to pass it with a majority, but less than 60 votes. And that also takes some time because Senator Manchin, who supports this bill very strongly, also believes we have to make a good faith effort to try to get those 10 Republican votes. Now, you or I may agree or disagree with that, but he does kind of hold the strings here, right? Because we can't pass it without his support. So we have to work with that. If we can get this done in the summer, it will still be a very powerful tool in protecting voting rights next year. Thank you, Karen.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you both. Let's go to Jeff H. Jeff, can you hear us?
I can, thank you. Thanks, Tom, for hanging in there. I know we're coming towards the end of this. There are a couple of areas I could ask you questions about, from the climate crisis to voting rights, which have been covered. But the one I actually have a question about, and I know I've raised with you before, is the very unsexy but structurally important one about deficits. I am all in favor of, I really am, of all the investments that the Biden administration is looking to make. They're needed, they're important, they're targeted. And I know that we missed a huge opportunity in the last administration in starting to pay down the debt with the tax cuts. But we are still racking up multi-trillion-dollar deficits. And when I last checked, we're at over $20 trillion cumulatively in debt. And that's not taking into account the intra-government payments. And I know the Biden administration is looking to raise taxes in target areas, which I'm all in favor of, but even in their own plan, they're still talking about $1 trillion plus deficits through the rest of the decade. So I'm just curious about, not from the Republican side, because they seem to only care about deficits when they're not in power, what you're hearing within the Democratic caucus or from the White House about really how sustainable that is and whether the taxes that are proposed are sufficient to actually pay down debt. And if they're not, whether we're going to be doing long-term damage if we keep running up the deficits at the level we're doing them.
Yeah, it's a very fair question. Look, I think the consensus is on our side of things that you needed deficit spending to deal with the crisis. And I think most economists agreed with that, the immediate COVID relief and stimulus, if we didn't do deficit spending, we'd have put the economy into a depression for years. And that would have hurt everybody and certainly not helped us pay down the debt either. Now we're in a phase where we're not actually talking about stimulus, we're talking about investment, and investments over time have to be paid for. And so what you're hearing from the Biden administration, and I agree with this, is that we should be looking for ways to pay for these very large investments that are being proposed. Politicians, especially in tight races like the ones I'm destined to keep running, we're rewarded for spending money, not for raising money. But I've always been open in telling people that, yes, I am for raising money as well. I would support raising the top individual tax rate to 39.6%. I absolutely believe, this shouldn't be a controversial statement, but I absolutely believe Amazon should pay taxes. I put that in a Twitter message that I sent out a couple of weeks ago, and you know who responded to me? Amazon. And we got into a little debate, but who in our district, no matter how conservative they may be on taxes, believes that Amazon should pay zero, right? That FedEx should pay zero. And that's a function not just of the corporate rate, of course, but of all of the loopholes and deductions that we have put in the tax code. It's not the company's fault, right? They're obeying the law. As we've talked about on this call, I'm totally for significantly ramping up tax enforcement at the IRS. There have been estimates that we could raise between $300 billion to $1 trillion over 10 years by making those investments. And that's not auditing middle-class people, right? Middle-class people get audited. And by the way, our middle-class folks' taxes tend to be very simple anyway. They're withheld by employers. So that's, that is about much wealthier people and corporations getting away with murder, basically, and we have to stop allowing that. Is that going to raise all those things that Biden has proposed, plus like the user fees Republicans want us to consider? That would pay for the investments that we are proposing to make, but you also asked, would it also pay for paying down the debt? And the answer is no. We're not, that is not in the proposals that have been made so far. So how do we do that? I think you and I probably have talked about this before. I think probably the biggest challenge we have fiscally as a country, and it's so hard, it's hard to talk about, it's hard to legislate on, is the overall cost of healthcare in America. The fact that we pay around twice as much per person for healthcare in America than the citizens of most wealthy countries in the world that have excellent healthcare. And the reason why that's so hard to get at is because, well, there are lots of people making a lot of money right off of the system that we have. You can't cut it from 12% of GDP to say 6% of GDP without a lot of people making less money, who are making money now, and those are powerful interests. But that explains a lot of the entitlement costs in America, or Medicare costs, Medicaid, huge parts of the federal budget, not to mention the burden that it puts on all of us as individuals. So I can name that problem. I can tell you what we have to address. How to do it is a much more difficult proposition. But for now, we pay for the investments that we make. In the long term, we have to look, I think, at that structural issue in particular.
Tom, just one quick
Sure.
follow-up. I actually worked with the Concord Coalition back in the 90s with Songus and Rudman, because it's been something that's been on my mind for a long time. And I hear you about the medical care. I think it's even a higher figure of GDP. It's almost coming up on 20% we're spending as a nation on healthcare. It's just that even under the Biden's plan, that based on their growth projections for the rest of the decade, that they're still projecting that we will have $1 trillion plus deficits each year. So when you look at what we're planning on spending, we're going to receive in revenue, it's a huge, huge deficit there. And so I'm not sure, and I trust you on this, but I'm not sure that we're even going to be paying for our investments as we go. At least that the deficit wouldn't continue to accumulate. But under the current plan, it's going to go up by eye-watering numbers. And again, I know it's something that maybe economists pay attention to, but I know it's something, it's a bill that's got to get paid at some point, and it's going to be future generations. And I'm, like you, sort of concerned about that. So I'm just maybe a little less sanguine that even what we've got upon the table is going to be paid for, even if it were to go through as described.
I'm not pretending to have a fully satisfying answer for you, Jeff.
Okay.
It's a legitimate question. Right now, I think probably the most we can hope for is a serious discussion of how to pay for the investments that we're making. But since we are already running a deficit, right, that's not going to lower the current deficit, as you rightly pointed out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, this will be our last question, and it is coming from Joel from Union. Joel, can you hear us?
I can, very well, thanks. Tom, once again, I have to always say how glad I am you're our representative, how relieved I am. And it's these town hall meetings are just wonderful. But I sent you a question online before this thing opened because I was so upset and outraged by the Israeli attacks on Gaza that killed 256 people. And then, of course, the Hamas attacks on Israel, which killed 12. And knowing that the United States basically bankrolls Israel in its weaponry, very advanced weaponry, compared to the very puny weaponry of Hamas. But it's terrible that these two groups keep lacerating each other and killing people. Of course, people say that if the United States stopped bankrolling Israel, they'd probably be more amenable to negotiation. On the other hand, the Israeli population has become more right-wing and more racist over the years. But I also know that as a representative, you have to stay in touch with your constituents and reflect the opinions of your constituents. But actually, something came along between the time I wrote that and now, and that is Rabbi Michael Lerner sent me his book, which is Embracing Israel-Palestine, which he will send for free for the shipping, the mere shipping cost of $8 to anyone. And I tell this to everyone on the meeting. And it's a brilliant, deep, historical, transcendent, and spiritual approach to this problem. So, I once gave you that book by Jonathan Simon about election integrity. And I was wondering if you'd allow me to have Michael Lerner send you this book. And by the way, it will give you the wherewithal to answer questions pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian in a hopeful, spiritual way, which gives me hope. And I've been, I grew up as a Zionist, right? Going to Hebrew school, and I've turned against it. And Israel used to be socialist and left wing, and now it's far right, and Netanyahu is corrupt, and on and on and on, right? So, but to learn this book came out in 2012, and he updates it on his tikkun.org website. And your dance card of reading material is probably full, but this is really good, and it's well written too.
I'd be happy to have him send me the book.
Okay. And if anyone else wants it, go to tikkun, TIKKUN.org and request the book. Get in contact with them, and they'll be happy to send it to you for just the shipping.
Thank you. Thank you. And just look, if we really start getting into this with 3 minutes left in the call, we'll be here all night. And of course I do listen to my constituents, and I have many constituents who have deep personal ties to this situation, many who have family and friends in Israel, others who have loved ones in Gaza or the West Bank, and many others who don't, but who also feel very passionately about what's going on. I won't be able to do this justice in a brief answer to you. I've said some things on social media where I try to address certain aspects of it. I am a strong supporter of aid to Israel, including for reasons that I think were evident during this latest horrible flare-up of violence, that one of the systems that we provided Israel, the Iron Dome missile defense system, saved a lot of lives actually on both sides. And people don't focus about how limiting civilian casualties on the Israeli side, and there were innocents killed, thankfully not the hundreds or thousands that would have been killed if the Iron Dome weren't there, also makes it easier for our diplomatic efforts to urge Israel to exercise more restraint in its response. It helped to avoid the kind of all-out war that would have been fantastically more damaging to both innocent Israelis and innocent Palestinians, and including children. Look, I am a traditional supporter of the two-state solution to this terrible conflict, but also someone who knows that it's not enough just to say that and then be done with it, because for reasons of politics on both the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, there hasn't been a realistic prospect of achieving a two-state solution in the near term for a very long time. And so, although I do believe very strongly that we need to protect Israel's ability to protect its own people, we can't just, we have to also do more to address the way in which people are living in the current state of affairs, including with a greater focus on the legitimate rights and aspirations of ordinary Palestinians who are caught between these forces. So that's, again, that's a top line answer for you on something that obviously is difficult and requires significantly more conversation to really do justice.
Well, thank you very much. This book will give you a very deep understanding both of the long-term history and of the Israeli politics and Palestinian politics that have prevented solutions when we were very close under Clinton. But
Yes,
it'll also take to another spiritually and transcendent level of advocacy. And if you could lend your voice at that level, it may really help to solve the problem. Not just politics as usual. Okay, thanks a lot, Tom.
Well, the other element of it is you could say Netanyahu can't last forever, but that he can.
Anyway, we'll see.
Well,
Yeah.
there are interesting changes right now in Israel that we're all watching.
Thank you very much.
We'll see. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Joel.
Guys.
Tom, I'm going to turn it right over to you for some closing remarks. Thanks everyone for being on this call today, and we really appreciate it. Tom, over to you.
Thank you. This has been another.
Hi, I'm Tom. Since you tried to force mute me,
thank you.
I thought I'd just go again. You claim to have donations from PACs, yet
sometimes happens.
I'd ask you to stop force muting my friend, because you do indeed take money from ExxonMobil. You took $13,933, which is completely ridiculous. And you really should stop saying that it came from an employee, because obviously it didn't. It came from the corporation.
You
Yeah,
also have
yeah.
taken insane amounts of money from companies such as Alphabet, the company that owns Google, companies such as
Okay, guys, you gotta do a little better fact checking here, okay? And it's not like you have a very good cause when you talk about climate change and campaign finance, but you're not doing that cause justice, and you're not doing yourselves a lot of favors by going after members of Congress who are #1 strong supporters of that cause with stuff that you have not adequately researched. It's just not, it's not very smart. So thank you. With that, I'm really, really grateful to everybody for participating, as always, in this call. At some point this summer, I'm hoping that we transition to old-fashioned live town halls again, although my guess is that we will continue to do Zooms. I think there are folks who will not come to a Zoom and who might come to a live town hall, and others who vice versa will not necessarily come to a live town hall and will continue to do Zoom. So I'm thinking we try to do a mix going forward in the future, and would love to have your thoughts about that as well. So let us know if you if you do. And meanwhile, look, I love to have this opportunity to lay out where I stand on issues and what I'm doing. The more clearly I do it, the more likely there'll be agreement and disagreement. And I think that's very, very healthy. It's out of that kind of conversation about policy, about issues, about ideas, that we get good governance and representatives who are truly trying to represent the interests of everybody they represent. As I mentioned, there's always something I learn on these calls that I didn't know before, something that challenges me to look at an issue in a slightly different way. So I really, really appreciate all of you for being part of that with me. So thank you all again, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.